One. Good evening, Canby. Welcome to our regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting. We'll start the meeting with a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. First and only consent item is the Housing Efficiency Measures final draft version of the Housing Efficiency Measures from the October 14th hearing, representing Planning Commission consensus from that meeting. From any of the planning commissioners, do we have any comments before we take a motion? Any comments, concerns? No? Okay. I guess we will then entertain a motion for the Housing Efficiency Measures final draft.
Okay. I'll move that we accept the Housing Efficiency Measures final draft from October 14th, 2024.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Very well. Roll call vote. Commissioner Jarosh?
Aye.
I am an aye as well. Commissioner Ewert?
No.
Very well. And we have Commissioner Hutchinson, and then we have Hannah, Commissioner Ellison, and Llewellyn absent, right? So it's 3 to 1.
Just to interject, I did receive commentary when I sent that out for the final version of the cottage cluster from Commissioner Hannah Ellison, and she said she had no additional changes. Given that she was the vote to initiate the cottage cluster recommendation of approval, I'm not sure what we do here, but I'm just, she's
So
not
we
here to
have,
vote.
well, we have quorum anyway.
So I think we're fine, yeah.
Yeah, so we have a 4-1 vote to approve.
Okay.
The Housing Efficiency Measures final draft version dated October the 14th, and ready to go for presentation to the council.
Thank you.
Next item up is citizen input on non-agenda items. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the Planning Commission on non-agenda items. Each person will be given 3 minutes to speak. Staff and the Planning Commission will make every effort to respond to questions raised during citizens input before the meeting ends or as quickly as possible thereafter. Do we have any citizen input on non-agenda items?
We do not.
We do not. Okay, and next up is old business. We have no old business to cover. We have no new business to cover, which then takes us to our public hearing. Tonight, there's a matter before the hearing body that requires a public hearing. All interested persons in attendance shall be heard on the matters. If you wish to testify on these matters, please fill out a public testimony card and give to the recording secretary. When your name is called, please step forward to the microphone at the front of the table. State your name, address, and interest in the matter. For longer presentations, proponents and opponents may buy time from one another. In doing so, those either in favor or opposed may allocate their time to a spokesperson who will represent the entire group. All questions must be directed through the chair. Any evidence to be considered must be submitted to the hearing body for public access. All written testimony received for and against shall be summarized by staff and presented briefly to the hearing body during the staff report. A decision shall be made by the hearing body at the close of the hearing on each matter, or it will be continued to a date certain in the future. This will be the only notice of that date you will receive. Do we have any questions about the procedure of the public hearing? Looking at the vast audience, I see no questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Planning Director Hardy to present on the housing production strategy.
Good evening, Chair Ellison and Planning Commissioners. Tonight, we're going to be discussing the housing production strategy. I'm going to give an overview of kind of how this fits into everything else that we've talked about on housing tonight. Just a preemptive item here. We did receive some fairly late commentary from the Department of Land Conservation and Development last Wednesday, and we spoke to them this morning. And so there will be some additional discussion around those items that they brought up, but I fully anticipate that this item will be continued to either a time in the future. I don't think we can give a date certain, but I just wanted to start out with that. But I also really want to get input tonight from the Planning Commission on this item for what we have put together, and to give context for additional work sessions that we'll be having regarding this item. So apologies for, the lateness of the commentary that came in, but they were not, they were substantive in their nature, and we are not expecting that level of commentary at this point. So just wanted to start with that. And so I just wanted to dive into our discussion here tonight, again, around housing production strategies, and I'll dive right in. So again, I think the foundation of this is really premised on the population projection, 20-year population projection for Canby, which is about 6,000 people, population going from about 19,000 now to about 25,000 in 2043. So there's a housing needs analysis that's been approved, and that was an inventory of buildable lands that was part of that, and identified the housing needs in the city. The housing production strategy are strategies to address the needed housing that will help implement the needed housing based on the housing needs analysis. So we covered some of this in our last meeting, but 20 years again, about 6,000 population addition to the population now. Again, housing is not very affordable, which is not a surprise. We've been discussing that. There's about 1,873 housing units needed over the next 20 years, and it's kind of broken down, as you can see, in terms of single family, 30%, standard lots, single family, small lots and cottages, 32%, townhomes and plexus, 19%, and apartments, multifamily, 19%. And this, again, breaks it down a bit further in terms of those same percentages, and just identifies the overall units, the overall needed housing units. And with all this in mind, even with the efficiency measures that we heard in our last meeting on the 14th, there's still about 73 acres of urban growth boundary expansion that's needed. So the housing production strategy is kind of the framing of this. They are to promote development of needed housing, identify tools, actions, and policies to promote affordability. There's 12 strategies that we selected, and those are in concert with Department of Land Conservation and our Housing Advisory Committee. We've been discussing this for around 2.5 years. This is kind of the culmination of that. Strategies will be reviewed during the Canby Full Code update process, and that'll start in the fall of 2025. We will intend to look at those individually, and strategy implementation would happen over a 5 to 8 year period. They can be changed in consultation with Department of Land Conservation and Development, and there is a recognition that each city is unique to the circumstances that each city has to achieve more affordable housing. Again, I think that one of the key elements in our focus is some of these are aspirational in terms of their look. They're intended as a framework in our view of this, and some of these items may be renegotiated as we get into this process further after they're adopted. We do intend to have an advisory committee as part of our code update, and we will be discussing a number of these items during the code update process starting probably next fall. It'll be budgeted in next fiscal year, 25-26. So we'll be coordinating with DLCD throughout that, and the strategies are recognized by DLCD that each city has, unique circumstances, as I mentioned. And back to the more recent commentary, and I've baked this into the PowerPoint on the more substantive comments that they did provide on last Wednesday, and then we were able to speak with DLCD representatives this morning. They really are focusing on the lower income levels in the community. I think overall, the upper income issue is dealt with pretty well. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but the lower income level between 0 and 30%, AFI, average medium income, AMI, average medium income, is the area that they were focusing most on, and believing that we needed to further consider other measures that we would add to the program. And that would be some items that we would need to further vet with the Planning Commission and City Council in particular. We did not really include financial elements other than system development charge, scaling of system development charges, and possibly waiving system development charges as part of future discussions. We haven't looked at other measures, and I'll get into those in a bit here. So those are really the comments that we received. And I think just in framework, maybe I'll stop there before we dive into the strategies. We're in a very somewhat unique time in terms of Oregon rulemaking is happening right now, and rulemaking has not identified precision in this process. And I think there's this discussion going on about how far do we go with the frameworking of this versus is this a specific action plan versus a framework plan? I believe the state is looking for this to be somewhat of a blend between those. A framework meaning that it would adjust over time, and if some of these strategies just simply were not something that was that could be supported through the Planning Commission and City Council review process, we would come back with other alternatives in exchange for those. And that process is not very well ironed out in terms of what that looks like once we revisit those, but the revisitation of this process would be, the framework is these are an 8-year implementation cycle. There's a midpoint at 4 years you're looked at, and you're reviewed by the state at 4 years to see how you've done in your progress. During that first 4 years, there's a number of these that we were targeting to look at within the first 4 years. If those were not materially something that Planning Commission and Council felt they could support, again, we'd have to come back with an alternative strategy to address those items. So it's really kind of the way to continue the conversation on somewhat of an evolving framework here, and I'll speak to those issues in a bit of detail. And some of those items, they're looking for, the state is looking for more tangible items versus aspirational items, which is more like specifics versus evaluating or looking at something more specifics to what we are doing. And again, more on the lower income levels between 0 and 30%, or between 0 and 50% AMI is probably the target most specifically. And before I get into the details here, I just wanted to point out, I think the system development charges, we are scoped to do that this year. I'm hoping that conversation can happen at least to the extent that we're looking at scalable size of homes, and a large home versus a small home. Should they pay the same system development charge? It seems like there's a bit of equity issue there, that a smaller home probably should pay less than a larger home by square footage. That'll be an issue. Housing affordability is another item. So should there be a deduction and, to promote more multifamily housing as well to meet these objectives to fulfill the 0 to 30% AMI needs. The other part of this is, the state mentioned, we had a conversation about urban renewal funds, and that's really a council directive about could those be used to do public-private partnerships. We have had recent interest in faith-based partnerships, churches in particular in Canby. Churches are redefining themselves, some of them to the point where their congregations are not as vibrant as they were historically, and many churches are looking at what is our purpose and repurposing themselves and looking at providing housing as well. This is not something that's unusual to Canby, but it's happening across the metro area. So that has not been fully explored, but I can let you know that there are some faith-based communities that are faith-based organizations that are looking at that in Canby now. The other items, again, I think are regarding, like development standards and those kinds of things, and we'll get into those a bit, is, and this would be another item for discussion by Planning Commission and Council is, should we be looking at allowing taller, like multifamily units in the R2, the high-density residential zone? Those are some things that's part of the discussion as well. That would be, again, with the notion. Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner Hutchinson.
What's the AMI number? Is it 47.5? Is that what we're looking at right now for AMI?
For,
I think that was Portland single person. Is that? I'm just trying to understand when you're talking about between 0 and 30%
sure, yeah,
AMI.
no, absolutely. So let me give you
about.
like some information. Great question. So 0 to 30%, you're looking at between, in terms of income levels, 26,555 or less to 44,259. That's annual income. And then the housing needs analysis broke this down into rent versus ownership, but that's the low end that is really being targeted. And I think above that, I mean, I think there's some tweaks to what we put together, but it really is the low end that we're being asked to look at. Some of these, it's a matter of like having a discussion around them, in my view, and, are there things that we could do more of, even partnerships, and some of this gets into partnerships with Clackamas County. That conversation is evolving to some degree as well. They are the regional agency here. We don't have a housing authority in Canby. Other communities have more of those kinds of things with housing authorities, and the county by default is kind of a housing authority. And this would be more like permanent housing versus shelters. So there's not really a focus on shelters. The focus on housing production is on permanency of housing. So there are, not to say that shelters are not important, but it really is about permanency. And so that's the direction that we were given by DLCD. I mean, ultimately, there's not an exact rubric is what they said, but I think at the same time, they have the ability to remand this as well if they feel like the bar has not been addressed. And since they brought these items up, it felt like we really needed to take a pause and go back to the PC and CC in kind of work session and walk through this. There's broader conversations around these topics as well at C4, which is the county collaborative that is happening with all the other organizations here that are related to ODOT and tolling, which is where the governor has taken this and done a pause based on housing and infrastructure. And Mayor Hudson's one of the chair people on that C4 as well. So there's lots of conversations around housing and what cities can and cannot do and what their partnerships are. It's very difficult in some ways to quantify some of this to make it really super tangible. So I think it does need a further conversation around this. Again, these comments they're recent, and we've been having this conversation a while. So this again is why this is substantive, because this came up for really the first time. So we weren't receiving this before, but we're like, okay, we're going to Planning Commission and now we're getting the detail. So that's where that's at on that. So I think what really it's more of an exploratory piece. I mean, like I said, there are kind of evolving things like the faith-based piece, which is interesting. I don't know about urban renewal. I don't really know where that's at. I need to find out more about that and talk to our administrator and economic development director on like where that's at. I know there was some talk about like sunsetting it and then bringing it back, but that part needs to be sorted a bit as to how that was done. I know this building was paid, I believe, for by urban renewal funding. So those are some conversation pieces that I think are part of that discussion. So if maybe I could just walk through these strategies with you all, and then we could, if that's okay, and then we can come back and touch on each one of them. So I did a few things. I put in the DLCD comments. They're not verbatim, otherwise I'd have pages and pages of PowerPoint. But I try to get to the substance here. And the first one is we had a development strategy for identifying land to upzone, potentially upzone. And some of that is related to the conversation that, I mean, right now, we have looked at Special Area J as a potential targeted area for upzoning. That's something we've had some conversations with the council on. There's a continued conversation on that, which will be happening on November 20th. And that is not inconsistent with the current comprehensive plan, which talks about having a certain amount of medium density and high density residential in that area in the current comprehensive plan. So that the comments from DLCD is, can you make it, do upzoning versus exploring upzoning? And so that's part of that discussion piece. I'm not sure where the council's going to go on that. And this, I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but if they decide to do map changes as part of the current comprehensive plan, that has an implication potentially on the urban growth boundary expansion acreage, because it would be an efficiency measure, not something you all have seen, but they would consider it an efficiency measure, which would mean we'd have a reduction in overall acreage, I believe, to some extent. And we're also having a conversation tomorrow with DLCD on that topic to see where that all goes. So it may end up just being a policy level thing in our comprehensive plan about that area, but that's one of those comments that DLCD provided.
And on Special Area J is along the 99 corridor?
It's along the 99 corridor, and it's where Walnut Street comes through in specific. So it'd be basically mainly north side of that, where that street is going to go through, but that is part of that area. That's been something that's been looked at for some time. There was a 2005 Transportation and Growth Management Plan that never got adopted by the council back in the day. There thus became some policy level in the current comprehensive plan about how many units, or how many acres rather, of medium density and how many acres of high density residential should be in that area. It is not pre-designated that way now. So the conversation there, I mean, I'm looking at this targeted strategy is, where would this apply? And that would be, it would be targeted areas, not like, hey, we're going to sweepingly, start upzoning everything across the city. That's not the intent here. But I think that's one of those items that is something that's being asked here of the city. So it would legitimately provide a different variety of housing types in that area, which could end up including cottage cluster, PUD, and some apartments, along with commercial, which is already out there, that would be combined with other commercial lands out there along 99.
Okay, thanks.
Which all is not inconsistent at all with the visioning and comprehensive plan work we've done and what the community actually has said aspirationally they'd like to see in that area. So I don't want to spend too much time on that focus, but that kind of gives you hopefully a bit of perspective on that. This is allowed cottage clusters, and again, you all recommended that be approved, and the council will be reviewing that on November 6th. Probably not a whole lot more to be said about that. Identifying opportunities to streamline PUDs and incentives to encourage diverse housing developments in PUDs. And you'll see the 2028 date, even though the PUD was part of the housing efficiency measure, it is an element of that. But there could be other elements that we would be also encouraging plan unit development. I don't know what those are, but that would be explored during our code update. There may be some discussions on our code update about expediting certain types of permits, and that could be one of those which we would discuss. Modifying, this is strategy E, modifying SDC fees with scalable based charges. And again, that needs to all get sorted out. That actually is going to be started this year. Like I said, we have a contract for our continued comprehensive plan work and also the system development charge updates. Most specific to that update process will be parks and transportation. Those will be ones that'll be focused on the most. They are the ones, transportation are probably the ones that have not been looked at. They need to be updated based on how long it's been since we've updated those. And so parks also needs to be looked at, but those are the two that are targeted. But storm and sewer will also be part of that as well. Strategy F is land use permitting education for property owners. That again is about making people recognize that there are certain provisions already in place. Accessory dwelling units, House Bill 2001 is also available, although we see very few of those homes where someone puts two homes on one lot or a duplex on one lot, even though that law has been in place for about 3 years. So those are the kinds of educational pieces there, and there may be others as well. G is reduce minimum lot sizes. Again, this is that, we've looked at that issue with the PUDs, and that's baked into that, so that's partially really addressed with the housing efficiency measures. But what other areas would, and this again would be committee level discussion during our code update, would there be other areas that would make sense for that? So we'd have detailed discussions around that. Strategy H is increase building heights in the R2 zone. Again, this would be have to be consistent with other standards dealing with like fire access, et cetera. I know there's been a discussion around usable open space. That would be part of that conversation as well. But the apartment zoning clearly is a targeted area, probably most specifically between 50 and 80% AMI. That's a targeted area that I think is important to fulfill that. And just Commissioner Hutchinson, you asked about the value, the wages, or the salary, yearly salary. Just perspective-wise, there's about 500 units needed over 20 years in this category. So that gives you a perspective here of what that is. So it's not a small number. It is sizable. Strategy I, update residential zones. And this sounds like a lot, but basically we are just looking at the statutes, and mobile homes are already supposed to be permitted in R1 and R15 right now. They are permitted by state law. We would just memorialize that as part of our code update. Strategy J would be considered alternative setbacks and design standards reflective of modern building designs as part of the Canby code update. And again, that would be part of that would be having to be more detailed in terms of what does that mean, what kind of setback changes, what kind of building materials would you be looking at, and those would be obviously part of some future discussions. Strategy K, inventory and encourage preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing. This was really targeted on mobile home parks. We do have some in commercial zones that are non-conforming uses, but how do we preserve those by making them conforming uses in the current code? Strategy L is partnership with Clackamas County, and this again is looking at them as a regional agency, which they are. But this is the one we probably had the most commentary on about not going far enough on, financially looking at possibilities or public-private partnerships. And those things need to be discussed with the Planning Commission and Council, I think, in more detail to come up with what those might be beyond what we've already included. And this, again, is a continuation of that comment. And, I think part of this is we're not a giant community. I think other communities have looked at things like, the one thing we probably could look at is urban renewal. I think that would be one of those items, but we do see larger cities doing things like Portland, which is, they're much larger and they're doing tax deferral, property tax deferral. They're doing construction excise tax removal for periods of time, and they're also doing SDC reductions. I think part of that is we're a smaller jurisdiction, so we need to look pragmatically at what we can do. I think some of those the scale of those in larger cities is a little more favorable. And we're not being asked to do those specific items, but I'm just throwing those out as to what other communities are doing.
When we're looking at options along those line of thinking, one of the problems that I've seen Multnomah County run into a lot is they offer these incentives up front, and then they say, oh, this is going to be a tax break for 10 years or something, or we're going to have these low-income units available for X amount of time. And so for maybe 10 years, there are units that are available to people who are in low-income brackets. And then as soon as that period of time is up, then they just flip over to market rate, and then they're gone, and they're not part of the market any longer. So it might be worth exploring somehow baking in something that really does keep it longer term available to people with limited needs.
And I was just at a conference, Oregon American Planning Association conference, in the last 2 weeks, and I listened in on the Portland one, and they're 99 years for those. I mean, but you're right. I think a lot of them, well, at least they have like provisions on them. They're not doing the tax deferral for that long, but it was a bit complicated what they were doing, but it was a lock-in, a much longer lock-in. But to your point, I have seen other communities do 10, and so I was wondering what happens. Does that become a free, fair free market base? And I think that would be part of that discussion as well, as, if that were to be something that, let's say we did waive or we do reduce the SDCs in light of that, what is the commitment, what is the covenant that prevents that from being converted back into something that is, we've lost this revenue source, and it should be a zero-sum game to the extent, and that's how Portland portrayed it. It was like, we're not losing money. They also have a captive audience, because unlike Canby, most people are like living and working in that area. It's a captive audience. Some people may not drive, whereas like most of our people are going into Portland metropolitan area to work, second most coming in from outside to work, and then third, those people that live and work in the city. So it is a very much transient community that we're in here. I mean, that may not always be perception-wise, but that's what the numbers show. So I think that's a really good point on like what would that time frame look like. So these are all like very broad brush items and a lot to digest. And I think for tonight, what I'm really looking forward is, would like to hear from you all is questions, concerns, items that you would want more information about. This is obviously going to take a bit longer than I was expecting. I thought we were kind of there already, and then so we're being pushed a little further on a few of these items to address them more specifically. And to that extent, I don't know what the exact outcome is, but at least having the conversation, I think, is an important one as to what can be done. And you guys have exposure to people, the council has exposure to people, and they're involved with other groups, which is also helpful collectively to say, what about, I've heard about such and such a community or whatever, and what they're doing. Those are all helpful. And some of these it may not be something that we can do on our own, but some of these may be partnerships that we could do where we explore things further. So with that, I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to go back to any of the strategies, but I wanted to just make you all aware of what that was. And just on the legal side, David Duman's on the line as well, and if you have questions legally about items.
Can we go back to slide, I think it was 16 of 16, and
Yep.
DLC, one forward? Okay.
So this is the mobile home park. So what this is let's say, for example, on 99E, there are some mobile home parks. They're zone commercial, they're zone highway commercial. That's not a zone that allows that kind of use without being mixed use. So they're pre-existing non-conforming, legal pre-existing non-conforming. This would be about making that code change and saying, we're going to recognize them as being legal conforming. We'd have to come up with some parameters around that to say what those standards would be, but that's part of this code update process.
And so just to, I mean, it seems like DLCD is kind of slapping us on style points a little bit on verbiage, right? You know?
They are, and I think, you know, and again, there's not an exact bright line on this, and that is something we've learned over this journey. You know, I wish there was a bright line, but there's not.
So in lieu of them coming back and saying, you will do X, Y, and Z, I guess I'm not clear on what the hell they actually will approve, because what I wouldn't want to see is housing projects going in Canby, right? Like, I don't think that's what our community would want to see, but I thought cottage clusters were kind of like our attempt at doing that, you know, so.
And that covers a range of, of AMI, and I think the question of the day becomes what level of, what can the city do at what level to assist in very low income, which is a really big question for a small community. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the question is related to us taking that on ourselves, but are there like let's say for example, if there was a faith-based organization that came in that wanted to do a multi-story building that was integrated with the church, and operationally they had different floors for different activities, would there be something that we could do to help with that process, either procedurally with permit processing, those kinds of things to, on our end, still go through the planning commission, or could there be system development charge reductions? What are those things that are in our control that we could do? They're not asking us to build government-assisted housing. I don't think that's the ask here. I think it's because I don't think we can, personally, I don't think that Canby can do it on its own. But it's what are those things that we can do to partner with other entities?
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Jarosh.
Yeah, I have a quick question on this one. So I think we talked about it, but where did we land on modular homes as a lower cost option?
I don't believe they can be restricted, Commissioner Jarosh, currently. I think there's not a prohibition against those. We haven't seen a lot of desire for that in Canby. I'm not sure if we've actually seen one since in my time here. But those are permitted. Those are already permitted.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Ewert? Commissioner Driscoll?
Specific to mobile home parks, I don't know what influence the city can have, but people who are living in the existing ones, the lot fees just keep getting hiked up higher and higher. And if you're spending $800, $1,000 a month for the lot that you're on, it doesn't really matter if the mobile home itself is relatively affordable, because you have a constantly changing, constantly rising fee that you have to pay to be there. And it's not like most of the time you can't just pick up your mobile home and go anyways. I mean, technically they can be moved, but once they're there, they don't really get moved. So I don't know if the city has any ability to put some kind of cap or percentage or something on that. If we're saying if this land is going to be used for a mobile home park, then the lot fee can't be more than X percentage of something, to try and keep it a little bit more reasonable and supportive of people who have lower incomes or need more affordable housing.
And that is one of the state strategies that was more so in the actual housing production documents, and there's a little bit more on that.
Okay.
I mean, I think some of that is another question, which is, and I'm just going to maybe translate that a bit. So in exchange for something the city may do, would the owner of that be willing to lock the rents in at an affordable rate? And that's something that could be explored as well, and is part of, that's a broader brush of that, not just allowing it as a conforming use, but, could we reduce the taxes on the, that people are paying on that? And, that would
In
be.
exchange for keeping it within a
Exactly,
reasonable
and
rate, yeah.
those are things that I don't think the city has really ever contemplated, and this is why I'm like pausing, because like some of these have fairly large discussion items around them, like yearly budgeting, things like that. I mean, and again, these are challenging in the sense that they're being measured over 8 years, with most of these being done in 5 years in what we're proposing. And you have different councils, you have different objectives, and each council that comes in will have a different perspective. So they have to be somewhat fluid in that sense. I think the end result are we trying to make a difference in the cost of housing ultimately? That is how I see this. It is really like, the target is not like you shall do these things, and even the housing production strategies that have been approved in other jurisdictions, they look different than what the ones now going forward, and we're apparently one of two going forward right now that like, and I'm not sure what the other jurisdiction is, that are being kind of reviewed in light of the fact that even though rulemaking is still in process, it does somewhat permeate that thought process back to DLCD. So I think part of that is making things where we feel like there'd be enough comfort in us saying, yeah, we could explore or do these things, versus we will do these things and we're not comfortable with that level. And that's where the decision makers need to weigh in on this. And then we would provide that back. And I think the ultimate goal is to not have this remanded back to us saying, you didn't go far enough. So I think it's a good faith effort piece, and I think there's a bit more to this, which was not necessarily explained to us at the front end, that like kind of getting into the deeper level here.
Follow-up question, if I could. So there's a grouping of manufactured homes that's just outside the city limits off of Lone Elder. They all own their own lots. And it's very inexpensive, because they're manufactured homes. It's kind of like their own cottage cluster of sorts. But do we have any thoughts of entertaining, strategies to allow for that?
Individual home on each lot, is that the question?
Yeah, the mobile
Okay.
home park, if you will, but everybody owns their own lot.
That's another, it's not been a really common form of ownership, but that's part of something that completely be part of the discussions that we're going to do with our code update starting next fall. I think there is no real limit to this. Right now, I'm just trying to get through the housing, through the state, and like, okay, let us have a chance. I mean, part of this is, just to be quite honest, we have not like really examined this like I think other jurisdictions have, which is they've had a bit more time to like, hey, we've gone through our code and we're kind of like trying to do this systematically, but we don't have all the information, nor do we know where that all is going to go. But I think that's another good point.
Yeah, it would be great if the city could do something to let people kind of pay to own over time. Like if there's some kind of agreement where, yeah, you are just incrementally paying towards it, and after 20 years or something, you own the land. Small little parcel under you.
Yeah, the ones off Lone Elder, I forget how many are there. It's quite a few, but they get snapped up quickly when they're up for sale.
And I think the individual home ownership, I mean, I think that is that really is a very good thing for a lot of, I mean, it's good for the owner, it's good for the economy. People build wealth with that. I mean, I think that is a target we would be interested in looking at. I mean, anything that, I mean, not to say that multifamily is not, but I think that it is definitely something that benefits the city and the owner in different ways than, just the renting, obviously.
Is there an expectation that's specific to the finding solutions to help people in the 0 to 30% range, that it's supposed to be ownership for them, or are we just looking at housing in general, as in you have a safe place to
It's
be?
a safe place to live, and the ownership part, and I think part of that is it's a hard slot to fill. I mean, I'm not sure even what Habitat for Humanity is doing. I mean, I don't know what that is, but because there's some skin in the game on that piece as well. I mean, not only just the labor, but you end up having, if you want to own it over time, you can, but you have to do that over time, and I've been involved with that.
So we're looking at 35,070 to 58,450, going from between 30 and 50. And that is the upper section that they want us to concentrate on, correct?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about people who are making 35 to 60,000 pretty much these days. And I encourage you again to remember being young and starting, not making very much money, needing a place to start and a place to grow, maybe a place for you and someone that you fell in love with to start, and none of these are places that you are going to stay in. I've been through several places to live, and some of them weren't the nicest. And so, I understand the value of ownership, but I don't think we should be looking, I mean, definitely not for under $35,000. I really don't see, with the cost of food.
You can't even afford a place to rent for that.
Yeah. And so that's
That's why I was curious what the goal was here.
Institutions, seems to be the place to go with that. And, and like you were saying, you start talking about housing projects, it's like, well, that's a project. It's not people, or it's not the market. It's an association or an institution or, some sort of organization or another, putting up half of this. And so, I would really like to be careful to avoid buzzwords and to avoid locking in a view of a certain kind of person, for lack of a better way to say it, for when we're talking about these income groups. It's pretty easy to understand that people who are under $35,000 are having a hard time, but I think the next step up from there, I mean, you're talking about regular apartments at that point. But you can't, it's like, it should be more associated with if you're going to increase the what you charge for these things, it should be tied to our tax limited rate that we have in Oregon, as opposed to, inflation or, the increase in value of moving here. Because I think that, like a lot of people, we're underestimating the immigration that we're going to have. And I think there's going to be a lot of people here. And I've started seeing some things around the neighborhood that I recognize from other places that I think is, to a certain degree, people are ignoring. And so, I don't know. I don't see myself, homeownership, to be a possibility, even in part, under $58,000.
No way.
I mean, even if we're just talking about a condo.
No. Well, the condo is still going to cost you like $400,000 to purchase, and you're going to be looking at like a $2,500 a month mortgage. If you're making $60,000 a year, you are not making enough money to pay that and pay for other necessities. Somebody making about $60,000 a year is going to have a really hard time paying for an apartment that costs $1,800 a month.
Yeah,
they will be absolutely
that's a school
struggling
teacher.
to pay the basics.
First grade teacher in their first 5 years of their career.
What I was thinking would be nice to encourage, where we have these instances of faith-based organizations who have land, who are looking at buying something or building up something, would be to build something that's a little bit more of a dorm-style situation. It could be focused on young business people, people who have physical disabilities, people who you can kind of group together by some kind of shared stage in life if you want. But either which way, if you just have a room to yourself that you can lock, you can have a little refrigerator, you can have a little space, but then you have a bathroom that's shared in a well-lit place, maybe kind of like literally like a college dorm where you might have somebody who lives on a different floor as somebody who gives support or help or make sure nothing shady is going on. A lot of people who have lower incomes, if it's because they are just starting out and they don't yet have the full earning power that they will once they're deeper in their career, or for whatever reason, they just aren't making as much, fine, whatever. If you have a place to live that's safe, you don't have to put huge amounts of money into an apartment, which in a lot of instances is multiple people living together in a relatively uncomfortable and unpleasant situation. Like when you have people who are sharing one-bedroom apartments amongst a couple adults, two-bedroom apartments among multiple adults, that ties into the parking issues that I am frequently bringing up. But it's just not a really great way to live. But if you have a safe place to come and go, it's your own space, then that could be a springboard to some people moving on into something else. Maybe you get, if you could I'm just thinking of my own experience. I ended up renting for 20 years. I mean, I've had a professional career, but still, because things were so expensive, and because of things that were outside of my control that affected, how much money I had on hand, it took forever to get out of that. And a lot of people who had similar experiences to me, if they didn't get in the housing market before it blew up during the pandemic, they're still renting and they probably will never get out of it. So it's like if you give people a couple years of a decent rate set that you can plan on, okay, I've got 5 years and then I've got to be moving on one way or the other, that could actually kind of help people save and then move into these ownership brackets that they wouldn't have been able to get into paying full market rate insurance.
So dorms.
Apartments.
I read an article about adult dorms recently, and I had
Dorms.
heard that there were some legal obstacles to doing it in the States, but it's pretty popular in Europe, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think those are items, as we'll have other discussions around this, but I mean, that is if there are unique things that have been missed here that could be explored, that may still feel more controlling, that we have more control over those elements, getting back to kind of maintaining the character of the area and the city. Those are things that I think were great. I think we should be considering, those options that may be somewhat unique, that other communities have done, or that you've, thought of on your own. Other comments? I know there's quite a bit here. This is a lot to take in.
It'd just be helpful to have a little bit more specificity from DLCD, and maybe they don't want to. Maybe they're
Well,
staying intentionally vague.
Trying to tie them down this morning to determine if I should be pushing for you all to make a recommendation tonight. And it's structured in a way that is at the state level that they really are responsive. They're responding to housing needs analysis in a way that is not like a land use thing, like you shall do X, Y, and Z, or you will not get approved. Mm-hmm. It's not in that format. It's more like, give us what you got, and we'll tell you if that is going to get remanded back to you or not, which is not necessarily super helpful. So where we ended the conversation was, I'm going to go back to Planning Commission, City Council, and joint session, hoping to get direction on these items with some commentary and discussion. I mean, I'll be talking to our administrator, et cetera, mayor probably about C4 and what they're doing there. And ironically, at C4, they're asking for jurisdictions that have adopted their housing production strategies to report out on November 11th. November 7th. And they're, because that's part of the discussion. And so that's a bit of that's related, but not directly related to what we're doing. But it gets to the point that is an important element the state is looking at about, if you're doing housing production strategies and you're helping fulfill these housing objectives, that ties into this tolling thing, and I'm not sure exactly how the linkages are going to work on this thing, but the infrastructure piece in particular would be looked at, like, how are we going to pay for all this stuff and still have infrastructure to pay for housing and to do all these things together as a state? That's what that group is doing. But I think there's that kind of conversation that needs to happen. There's more conversation with the Planning Commission and City Council that needs to happen. Then back to DLCD saying, which is what we asked. We said, could we provide this back to you and say, at least give us input on it? We may not still get a complete, like, hey, green light on this thing, but at least we're getting the information. If we were to go in now, I don't think it'd fare well.
I don't
for what
feel
we have.
like,
Yeah.
I feel like we've dove pretty deeply into R1 as it exists and things that we are going to do there to make that more available, but I've spent hardly any time down at the 30% land, and I don't feel like I have a comfortable idea of what options are available, to be honest. And so it's like how small can you make an apartment and still have it have value and at a price per square foot that for current rental markets that, I mean, I really don't feel like I have anything mentally to hang on to like I do with R1, just because we spent a
What are
lot
the
of time
options?
talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we were trying to stay it more like, hey, we'll explore and we'll evaluate and we'll partner. And they're saying, well, that's really great, but what is it exactly you're going to do in that realm? And
Well, and
Yeah,
it's
it's
like,
like, yeah.
800 square feet isn't ridiculously small for one person. It's not too bad.
yeah.
And so, I mean, like saying if you're going to create a bunch of rental units that are 750 square feet or below, then we could find a way to incentivize that. But I don't know how small these floor plans can go. It's just not the kind of thing that I've wrapped my brain around since I was living, with Chuck Yeager's grandson and another guy in a $210 one-bedroom apartment in college. 3 of us. It was ridiculous. There was no homework done there. But, $70 a month, my goodness. But that's ridiculous. It's nothing like that now. And I can kind of wrap my brain around at what a $1,200 apartment is now because my daughter has some friends that are, hunting and finding things and getting their first roommates and things like that. But it's like, that still seems like a little higher than what the target we're looking for here is. So I would appreciate more information on just what kind of things other people are building down at that level, because I haven't been exposed to it really.
And that's part of what we'll dive into as well. Commissioner Ewert, any thoughts? You seem like you're digesting all of this.
I have a lot of thoughts on this. Canby is becoming the frog in the boiling pot of water is what it boils down to. If I were going to go to them, I'd just say, what do you want us to do? And tell us, because it has been brought up multiple times tonight that, well, we can come up with the idea and we'll take it to them and then they'll tell us what we want, whether they're going to accept it. Well, just tell us, okay? And then that way we can figure it out. It's not, it's their strategy, it's not ours. And I really never thought that Canby would come to this, but it's the state that we live in. And so I have a lot of thoughts on it. I have a lot of I personally, I think that everything that we're discussing here tonight is not where Canby wants to go. I really don't believe that. And I just don't. And so it is, it is just, it's what the state is telling us that we're going to do. And, we even have to have our legal counsel standing by so that we don't say the wrong things. And so I'm not, we'll just follow it and see where it goes. But as far as I'm concerned, they might as well just tell us what they want us to do. And we'll just see if the council can stomach that. So That's my thoughts on it. Nothing against you.
No, I understand.
I'm not shooting a messenger.
No, I
here,
got it.
Because that's all you are, as a messenger.
And we're trying to navigate this as well. I mean, it's challenging, and one of the saving graces of this is we are ahead of the rulemaking, and we are somewhat ahead of a lot of this process, because there are going to be allocations that will not immediately affect Canby because we did the sequential urban growth boundary process. So we are somewhat vested for a while before the other state requirements start to come in, and that's beyond these, which, I mean, so
I guess all that turning up the heat, okay?
I guess what I'm trying to say is I'd like to see if we could craft something and be ahead of this that would be Canby-esque to the maximum extent, no matter how uncomfortable that is, versus what's going to be coming, which is more intense than what we're now talking about.
The guidance that they're giving and the kind of rulemaking that the state is looking at, is it across the board regardless of the size of the city, or is it specifically aimed at the 25,000 and greater contingency? I know that there has been some discussion about some things applying to smaller and mid-sized cities a little bit differently.
And we're under the mid-size. We're going to be a mid-size community in 20 years. We'll be at 25,000, and there are certain things that there are requirements to come up after that. We are in the 10 to 25,000, 19,000 population now. And we're not in metro, which means there's a whole bunch of other things we're not having to deal with.
Yeah.
But like all other communities, or even outside of metro, they're having to go through the same exact exercise. They're all going through this differently, and each community does it a bit differently. There's some very, very rural communities in Oregon, and there's some pretty urban communities. It's a pretty interesting mix, actually, but there's a lot of communities like Canby. There's a ton of them, and they're all going through that same process. And I think the exploratory thing that Commissioner Hutchinson talked about, what are the other jurisdictions doing? And then maybe that's a starting point, like, for that discussion on, this continuation of that to figure out, and that's difficult because there's not a gazillion cities that have done this. But even so, I think there's stuff that we could come back with and have more of a conversation around it. And maybe some of that's, there's some unique things out there that maybe make sense here. Maybe that would be something we could talk about, so.
We could always go to, we can always say, we're going to take action and go to Clackamas County to partner with, or to go in and partner on a low-income housing project. But you can say that, but is Clackamas County going to acquiesce? Are the ratepayers, who's going to be impacted? The ratepayers are going to pay for it. We are, you know what I mean? So if they're looking for empty action statements, how are they going to argue one way or the other that your intent?
Well, and I think they're looking for us to give them more substance, not necessarily just aspirational, throw something out there. They're not, that's not necessarily what's being asked. I think it's more like, how, do a bit more homework, come back with some ideas, give it a good faith effort, and I think that's what the ask is. And so how much these change is a question mark, but could there be some more definitive things that are out there that we consider?
Do you say, out of all the buildable land that we've identified, we're going to dedicate, our intention is to dedicate 3% of that buildable land or whatever relative to what the charts were showing earlier in terms of the population or the expectation of growth and all the different incomes levels that they're saying are present here. Can you go as far as to say, hey, we're going to try to scale something to match that need in terms of what we dedicate or what we try? Is the city going to buy up land to go dedicate, 3% of buildable land to low income.
I think the starting point would maybe not be acquiring land, but is there surplus land now that would be something, and that's probably another item altogether that would be a discussion point, that it's not committed to something else. I think buying land, that seems like a big jump, for Canby. I'm just, with our financial situation and paying for everything else, that seems like a big jump, but that would be something that could be talked about as well.
When you brought up the tolls and the undecided nature of what's going to happen with the tolls, how does that tie into this?
So this is my understanding, and I haven't been really participating in C4 directly, but the pause on tolling was linked by the governor to housing to a degree, which is like, okay, we're now going to totally congest all these communities with the diversion that's going to happen, and the infrastructure is really not going to be able to keep up with that, and will be contrary into our goal of providing housing. So now there's this evaluation of looking at infrastructure related to housing in specific, so that is not a detriment to that. And I know these are challenging things to because I can't really completely explain it, but that's essentially what happened. So there's discussion about looking at infrastructure and its needs for housing, and making sure that is being considered before we do anything on tolling.
So going forward then, for this conversation to keep moving, planning is going to take on providing or doing the legwork to research options, see what other cities or jurisdictions are doing, present that back to us, see how much of this we can stomach, and then spit it out on paper and give it to city council to think about.
That's really, I think, the course here. And I know you guys you've heard about this forever, and I'm hoping we can close this out pretty quickly. But I was trying to get it done by the end of the year.
Yeah.
And just be done with this discussion, with the notion that we would come back and, as we got into this stuff and the code update, et cetera, some things would work, some things wouldn't. We'd come back and renegotiate with the LCD, but there's a level of specificity we're being asked to look at that is a little more detailed. And we'll come back with everything you said on that. And I think it would be helpful, to the extent if I can pull it off, to do a joint session with Planning Commission and Council and to get all the input together. And this is going to take us a bit of time to pull all this together. So I don't have a date certain, so we will end up continuing this discussion. And so we probably will go ahead and re-advertise this hearing whenever it comes back and play. And I'm guessing that'd be the beginning of the year, next year.
Okay. Any other parting comments on this subject? Commissioner Jarosh? Commissioner Driscoll?
No, thank you.
Hutchinson? Ewert? Not so much. Okay, so we will then close out on this discussion of the housing production strategy and DLCD comments, and we said this will be continued or paused and then re-advertised.
We'll re-advertise, because I cannot tell you with the date certainty when this is going to come back. And again, I'm not trying to take more time. If anything, the goal again was to be aspirationally done with housing discussions for this year and then move into next year, but we're going to continue, unfortunately. So.
Okay. So then next up is items of interest and report from planning staff.
And I wanted to start out by doing a little congratulatory for our Planning Commission Secretary, Lainey Fauci. She's been here 13 years, and wanted to recognize her for her good work here as a secretary, and a bit of token gift to her for the beer library. So she just wanted to say thank you, Lainey, for all your good work.
Yay, thank you, Lainey.
So I want to start with that, and just a plug for the beer library. I know we're not supposed to necessarily doing this, but I was very impressed with how that turned out. I've not eaten or drank there yet, but very impressed with their offerings. I don't know if you all have been down there, but.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really good.
Can I make a comment on that?
Commissioner Ewert.
I just want to say that as far as the beer library or the food cart thing was concerned, I was extremely hesitant as to the product that we were going to get. But that thing cooked long enough to where it actually turned out to be something great. I've been down there 4 times now since it opened. So I just want to kudos. I mean, it was good. They did everything that we were looking for, and that's the kind of product that we were looking for. So, moving forward, if anybody else is looking at doing something like this, I don't know how many more food carts we can handle, but if they're as good as that one is, I think that they will be okay. And so I just want to say kudos to you guys for putting together a good project there. It was a good outcome.
And I just want to thank Ryan Potter. He's, obviously not here, but he was really inspirational in working with the beer library folks, and just I think it came together well. There was a bunch of iterations. Now that's all water under the bridge, so to speak. And but yeah, I was super. I mean, we're big connoisseurs of brew pubs, and I was very impressed with that. Not been inside of one of their facilities before, but yeah, I would thank you for your comments. Got a couple hearings coming up, and we do have hearing items for those. So the next hearing will be November. We don't have a hearing on November 11th because of the, it's a Veterans Day. I think it's Veterans Day. And the hearing after that is November 25th. And I'm just trying to get to my notes here. That would be North Hawley annexation. It's a small annexation on the north side of town. North Hawley annexation, Planning Commission will be reviewing the rezone and annexation application. Then December 9th is Oregon Liquor License Control. That's the warehouse that's coming on December 9th. So the next couple of hearings coming up. I don't have anything to report on community summits, et cetera. Those will start up next year on the comp plan. We'll be getting back into that. Some of this is contingent. I talked a bit about the special area J, and we're kind of waiting for that decision or guidance from council on November 20th, so that we know, are we doing map changes, are we not doing map changes, because it has implications on transportation, kind of holding off the transportation review until we know that. So housing and employment are factored appropriately for that area as we go through that exercise. So more to come on that. That is just kind of in the background. It's not stopped, but that's going to go full on next year. We're going to be right back into it with 2 more summits, and we have a number of advisory committee meetings as well next year. So I don't have those all charted, and that was it for me tonight, unless you guys had something else.
I had a question about the liquor distribution center that's coming down the pike. When it gets to us, will we have information about what their planned operating hours are, and how many people are going to be hired in versus moved from other locations?
And which project?
The distribution center.
Distribution,
The
oh,
state
yeah,
liquor
yeah.
Distribution center.
Part of that is, and I need to dive a bit further. Ryan Potter's leading that up, but I don't know we will be asking specifics about employment, because there's a 3 employee per acre requirement for that. I don't know how that got broken down, but we will. I'm sure that information, it's going to be. It's going to be provided to the Planning Commission. I don't know the detail yet, but we can provide that.
Yeah, just when we get to it. And
Yeah.
then, the operating hours, so we know.
I know the operating hours are
Vehicles.
not long. They're fairly short. I mean, that's the part I do know. They're not like a normal private sector warehouse distribution facility.
Yeah, they're going to have a lot of semis when they are coming and going, and I was curious how that would align with typical workday traffic.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay, items of interest, report from planning staff. Commissioner Ewert, go ahead.
So, being though we're talking about that subject and a lot of semis and whatnot, what's our Walnut Street bypass looking like? Has the state of Oregon decided to bless us with a permit to move forward while they're going to be bringing more semi-trucks into our town?
Let me tell you what I know on the Walnut Street extension. I understand that we have worked through the ODOT process. I believe the signature for that, for the administrator, was provided to her to sign for the agreements. The next part, I believe there's some design still going on. It's going to go out to bid, as I understand, in the next several months, and then would be started in construction. It's about a year, I believe, to construct, but that's kind of the general time frame.
Okay.
I'm hoping.
I'm not answering.
No, it's near term. It's near term. Yeah.
So by end of '26, it should be built. Maybe?
We're
Okay.
it is important, I know I keep saying that, and it is being pushed. I mean, you're not the only person asking. The mayor's asking about it as well.
Were you asking the mayor? Okay. Also, I will be absent on November 25th. I will be out of state. Will you be able to take charge of the meeting as vice chair? November 25th. All right. I have no other items of interest from the Planning Commission. We will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
And a second.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All against? Nay.